Hey guys, how you all doing? Happy Friday to you all. Newcastle over in Singapore landed yesterday. Obviously, as you all know, no Alexander ISAK there as part of the travelling party. He's back home here in Newcastle, trying to trying to engineer a move away from Newcastle United, which is far from ideal. But look, I don't think it's a definitive that he's leaving. We'll get that into that in the video. But I've got an update that you may have seen already regarding James Trafford. So before I get into the video, if you're new to my channel, please do subscribe. I'd appreciate that. Leave your comments below and like as well. I would appreciate that as well. So let's get into the video. We'll start with James Trafford because that's the new news, so to speak. And I'm sure most of you will have noticed earlier that Trafford has an agreement in place to join Manchester City on a 5-year deal with a year's option. Now, I feel like we've been talking about James Trafford for months, and we have been, because Newcastle's interest in James Trafford has been going on for months. And as much as this window has been a bit of a nightmare, and it has, the nightmare continues because James Trafford is obviously going to Man City instead of Newcastle. However, what I will say in this deal is it's not a case of Trafford choosing City over Newcastle. We've seen so many other players decide against coming to Newcastle and essentially reject them. The likes of Liam Delap, João Pedro, Brian Mbeumo, Dean Howson, and then more recently Hugo Ekitike a couple of weeks ago. Last week actually, feels like a couple of weeks ago, it was only last week. But this one's a bit different. I get the impression he would have really been open to a move to Newcastle. He would have competed with Nick Pope for number one. I'm not sure if he would have come in straight away and been number one, but I think probably at some stage over the season, if Nick got an injury, James Trafford would be given the gloves, and I think he would have been given a real opportunity to become the sort of long-term successor to Nick Pope as number one. However, the Man City deal has happened because with just hours left of this kind of mini transfer window that was created, Man City struck a deal with Burnley. Now remember, he was at Man City before Burnley. Man City sold him to Burnley, and they inserted a buyback clause in there, and there was also another clause in his contract called a matching clause, which meant that if a team came in and had an agreement with Trafford, which Newcastle did for £27 million plus some add-ons, it meant that City could match that offer, and Trafford would have no choice in where he went. So this was something that was inserted into, I'm told, into Trafford's contract way back when he was a Man City player in 2023 and sold to Burnley for whatever it was, 13 million, was it? Something like that at the time. Don't quote me on that, I can't remember the exact amount, but this was inserted into his clause that City had the power essentially, and if any other club who wanted them, like Newcastle did, if City came to the table, they were powerless. So, if you'd asked me this question about sort of 2.5 weeks ago, I would have said I expect Newcastle to get the deal done. Look, at one point, I know a few people were saying that a deal was done, and it's all but done. My understanding back then, a few weeks ago, was that they were still about £10 million apart, Newcastle and Burnley, which is strange because Newcastle's first offer, I think, was 21 million, and he's gone. The agreement's in place for 27. So, but back then, Burnley were looking for something that started with a 3, and I was told Newcastle were £10 million away. However, that gap closed. I think Trafford said, look, I'd be open to moving to Newcastle, but everyone was aware, well, City certainly were aware, and so was the player himself, that Man City had this clause in the contract, this matching clause, which meant that they could match Newcastle or anyone else's offer, and Trafford would have no option but to move back to Manchester City. Now, I'm not saying that he doesn't want to go there. He may well do want to go there, but I think he was quite open to Newcastle, and this certainly isn't a case of of him rejecting Newcastle. I think it's a move that he would have liked, and even today, earlier this morning, I was told that although Man City had this agreement in place, he was still considering Newcastle, but it wasn't the case that he was considering Newcastle because he can't. I think it was just that he liked the idea of coming to Newcastle, but the decision effectively has been taken out of his hands, and Man City, I'm told, are really pleased with their clause because they're buying back essentially one of their academy prospects who's done really well in the 2 years he's been away, and they're getting him back, and they've got the power to get him back because of that matching clause that they've put in his contract. So look, that doesn't help you guys as Newcastle fans because all you want to do is have James Trafford in your squad. You wanted to have all these other players I've mentioned already, and you want to have Alexander ISAK in your squad. And look, when you look at the window so far, it's been a nightmare. It's been a bit of a nightmare. And when you throw that Trafford situation into it, it's almost just like the tip of the iceberg. It's like, how many more ways can you be shafted here? You've got so many players turning you down for bigger money, for moves to London, whatever it may be, for Real Madrid coming in for you. And then you've got your talisman, your best player, your top goal scorer, essentially saying, I want to leave the club, I want to explore my options on the day that you travel out to Singapore for the real start of the pre-season preparations, which is a hammer blow. And then one of your other targets who actually does want to come to Newcastle can't come because of this clause that's in his contract from when he left Manchester City. So, God, it's one thing after the other. It must be really frustrating for you guys, and I know many of you will be sitting here saying, "Well, hang on, how did Newcastle not know about Man City having this in their contract?" And they must have been told. And look, they probably weren't aware to start with. But once Man City came to the table a couple of weeks ago, you'll be aware that the Trafford thing kind of went quiet a little bit. It felt like it'd just been parked. And the reason for that is because it came to light that Man City have got this clause, and it was up to them to firm up their interest in whether they were going to come in. And they've decided last minute to come in, match Newcastle's offer, and off Trafford goes to the Etihad. So that was why it kind of went quiet for a while, because we're waiting to see what Manchester City were going to do. And then Manchester City have decided to activate the clause, and there he goes. But anyway, there goes another one bites the dust. But back to Isak. Yeah, it's been a difficult couple of days, of course. Really intriguing to hear what Eddie Howe's got to say at his press conference tomorrow. So this is Friday night, I'm recording this right now, so tomorrow in Singapore ahead of the Arsenal match on Sunday, he's doing a press conference. It'll be intriguing to hear what he's got to say, how strong he goes in Isak. Obviously at Celtic last week, I felt like he was protecting him a little bit by saying, look, I'm looking after him, I'm taking him away from the speculation. I'm aware that every player, what was he said? He said, I'm aware that every player has a short career, which that to me, and I think I said this to you yesterday, but that to me is almost like words that have been communicated to him by either Isak and or his representative, that they've said, look, it's a short career, I'm 25, I'm going to be 26 next month, this is my time to move. If he maybe moves next year, coming up 27, the Liverpool want him then, there's not much resale. It feels like a sweet spot in terms of his age at the moment. Liverpool like to buy young talent. I just find it amazing that they're going to potentially buy Isak when they've already got Ekitike, when they're very, very similar players. And it's just incredible to think that 12 days ago I was sat here talking about Newcastle potentially having Isak and Ekitike to choose from, and then suddenly Liverpool have got both. And look, Liverpool have done a number on Newcastle. They've absolutely done them over here. You look back now and you think, God, perhaps if Newcastle had just said, look, okay, we don't want to lose Isak, but we're aware that he's not that happy, and perhaps if Newcastle had kind of allowed Liverpool to come to the table and let's see the colour of your money, then Newcastle would have got Ekitike and they would have been in a much stronger position. But I think Newcastle tried to blink first. They tried to get Ekitike in so that if they were then going to have to sell Isak, they're then selling from a position of power, if you know what I mean. They've got the replacement in the door. They can ask for top dollar from Liverpool or whoever it may be, whereas now if Isak goes, say for example Isak went in the next week, Newcastle don't have a main striker, and Leipzig or whoever it is can just demand anything because they'll think, oh, hang on, Newcastle, you've just banked whether it's 130, 140, 150 million for Alexander Isak, and they can essentially name their price. So I think Newcastle tried to get in early with that one, but it's just worked out terribly for them. I was thinking about it earlier, and I was like, what Newcastle should do is say, there you go, you can have Isak, there he is, 135 million, but you've got to loan Ekitike back to us. That's probably what Newcastle should do. Whether they can do that, I don't know whether Ekitike would be up for it. But look, Ekitike is going to be, if Isak does go there, Ekitike is going to be number 2 striker, whereas he would have been number 1 at Newcastle. It's just, the whole thing's a mess. It's an absolute mess. Will Isak be a Newcastle player at the start of next season? I still think there's a chance of that because of the numbers that are involved. Liverpool need to come up with that money. I've had a couple of people saying Liverpool could spend it anyway. I'm under the impression that Liverpool would need to raise funds. They would need to sell first. Whether that is Diaz, or whether that's Diaz and Elliott, or whether it's Diaz, Elliott and Nunez, I don't know. I mean, look, there might not be... Nunez hasn't been great, but he's a bit of a cult figure, and it might not be the worst thing for Newcastle to say, right, you can have Isak for 120 million, but give us Diaz, then at least you've got a player in. I know he's a bit rough around the edges, but, you know... at least it gets another striker in the door, and if you get Vissa done, then you're not having to overpay for someone like for Sesko, who don't get me wrong, looks good, scores goals. He's not that pacey. I don't know if he's going to be the same player as what Isak is, where at least someone like Nunez, although his finishing isn't great, he gets in behind. Maybe he just needs a fresh start. I don't know. Maybe I'm just being a bit stupid saying all this, but there must be options there for Newcastle to try and get a forward. Then Nunez is available. I wonder if Newcastle can try and get him as part of the deal. It certainly wouldn't be the worst idea I've ever heard. So anyway, that's it from me today, guys. Not good in the Trafford situation, but look, I think the priority right now is dealing with the Isak situation and then taking it from there, because it must be a difficult camp out there in Singapore at the moment, without your talisman back home here. In a bit of a huff about the situation, the last thing you needed going into the new season, when this was supposed to be a window where you improved. Let's see what the weekend brings. Let's see what Eddie Howe's got to say tomorrow. Leave your comments below. Nice to see you all, even though I'm not seeing you. Nice to speak to you all, is the word I'm looking for. See you in the next video. Cheers, guys. Bye-bye.